When I agreed to do this talk, Jackie, Reverend Jackie, beautiful Reverend Jackie, she's been a friend of mine since I was in ministerial school. She actually finished ministerial school.
Okay. I'm done now. We're good.
Not that kind of show. I said, let me know if there's any particular topic that you want me to talk on. Otherwise, I'm going to talk about spiritual improv because that's what I do. That's my thing. And she said, I'll let you know. And she did. Several weeks ago, she said, Ned, you wrote a blog on your website, nedkelly.net. By the way, www.nedkelley.net. That's what she said to me. I said, yes, that website called Comfort the Afflicted, and We're All Afflicted. Would you be willing to talk on that? I said, sure, of course, that would make a great talk. Then I had to go back and look at the blogs to remember what I wrote, and I realized, yeah, that would be a good talk. So I've been planning on that for several weeks, and this has been a rough week. This has been a rough past week. And when things happen in our community, in our country, in our world that really hit the collective consciousness, hit our psyches, it's kind of important maybe sometimes to change plans, to shift gears and come together. You know, that's part of what spiritual community is for. I know Wednesday night you have a meditation group, and I think this past Wednesday dedicated it to world peace, and that's so appropriate. So glad you have that. But over the past few days especially, I realized I need to talk and address these things on Sunday. And I realized what I wanted to talk about was comforting the afflicted, and we're all afflicted. So I keep the same talk that I had in mind, just with some twists and variations. So that worked out. And yeah, normally I'm kind of the funny guy, right? And I think Jackie kind of built me up to be, you're going to love this guy. No pressure there. And this is a somber moment. This is a sacred time. Yes, and we can do both. Yes, during time of mourning and grieving, laughter can be healing. So any emotions, whatever comes up and out of each and all of us today, let's just honor that for each other. It's a safe space around that. Whether we're sad, happy, all of it at the same time, as a matter of fact. Because all lives matter, yes. And Black lives matter. Because we can honor that sacredness of each and every life. And recognize that, yes, and recognize injustice, unfairness of how minorities are treated particularly, and perhaps being slaughtered, literally, because of the color of their skin. Because we can be angry at police brutality and excessive force, yes, and care about the lives of police officers like my brother, who's a cop out in Seattle, whom I am scared for. We can care about them and work to protect them. Because we can honor and celebrate our freedoms, our independence in this country. Celebrate and be grateful for all the advances we've made as a nation. Yes, and at the same time realize the systematic problems that we have when we are number one in the world in having people incarcerated. Both the total number of people incarcerated, kept in cages in this country, and per capita. We're number one. Yes, and we can celebrate in this movement, the unity movement. We can affirm and know our oneness with all beings. We can strive to become immensely aware of and remember that oneness with all and celebrate community and connection in all. And, yes, and at the same time, we can be mindful of the possible perils of collectivism, of nationalism, of thinking us versus them-ism, whether that's race, whether that's political party, red versus blue, whether that's the cops versus the citizens, whatever. We can be aware of that collective thinking, how there can be destructive part of that, if it doesn't unite us as oneness in all beings, brothers and sisters, heart to heart, all of us together, if it ends up separating us because my flag or my club, my group is better than yours. So we need to be aware of that. Because it's ours to know when we need to comfort each other and when we need to challenge each other. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I found out that originally was about the newspaper. That someone coined that phrase talking about the newspaper industry. Now I don't know what the news media is, what their role is to prop up and support those in power. It seems to be mainstream media, by the way. I can say these things, I'm just visiting. So how do we find specific ways to comfort each other and perhaps to challenge one another? Sherry Maples, who had 25 years of law enforcement as a police officer, as different roles in the judiciary, and also ordained by Thich Nhat Hanh. So here, I'm going to read a bit now, so settle in. I hate it sometimes when people up front just start reading stuff. But you'll like this, trust me. All right. 6 questions we all have to ask ourselves. Creating the justice that leads to public safety is a shared responsibility between a community and its police department. Here are 6 questions to help us examine deeply with inquiry and action. Number 1, why is racial profiling happening? This is not just a question for police officers, but for all of us. How do we become more aware of the conscious and unconscious bias operating in our individual and organizational decision-making? How do we monitor and shift the unconscious agreements that lead to racial profiling? Number 2, what is the police standard for using deadly force? Police officers have a great authority, including the ability to employ state-sanctioned violence, including deadly force, as they deem necessary and appropriate. The community has a right to know what the standard for deadly force is, how it is set, how it is trained for. She continues, a reverence for life includes not only asking such questions, but working to change and shift the agreements around the unnecessary use of force. Sherry's question number 3, how can trust be reestablished between the police department and the community? How can we build bridges to repair harm and create better understanding between members of the police department and those they protect and serve? Notice she doesn't say civilians, and I agree with, I so don't like dividing up, there's cops and civilians, because that's a military term, civilians. This whole idea that police even use, my brother recently applied for he took his exam to become a sergeant, and he's on his way. Those are terms that the military uses. And this whole militarization of the police, I find despicable, because if that means they're at war. And who are they at war against? So anyway, that's an aside from me. Back to Sherry's list. How can coordinated community responses be set up in response to problems? How can we build informal safety nets? How can we build neighborhood capacity, especially in challenged neighborhoods? This includes issues around mental health and poverty. Are there tools out there for doing these things that are not being utilized? How do we, and this is her 5th question, how do we address the emotional health and effects of incremental trauma that officers experience over time, whether they recognize it or not? I recognize that in my brother. He's a fun-loving guy. I grew up with him. He's a great guy. He's a good man, a good person of integrity and kindness and compassion with his children, and lets them romp all over him. And I noticed the edge of hardness growing on him over the years. So how can we be aware of that and help out people that have such a stressful and dangerous job? Last question from our Buddhist cop, Sherry. What are the root causes that underlie patterns of crime in our communities? Different communities have different patterns. What are the methods of collecting data on these various patterns? What would appropriate and creative responses look like? Because all things arise due to causes and conditions, what we do in response matters. What we care about matters. What pathways we cultivate in our hearts and minds in response to these tragedies and problems matter. I'll share a link to that full article. It was on Lion's Roar, a Buddhist publication. How do we do that? Find ways to comfort one another, brothers and sisters, heart to heart, and at the same time challenge things that we notice and think are wrong. I want to invite you to take an inventory now for yourselves, by the way. Which role are you more comfortable playing? Are you a challenger, an afflictor, or are you a comforter? We all probably tend to take on one role more than the other. And that's fine, that's natural. We are unique individuals. I was always pretty comfortable being an afflictor. If there was buttons to be pushed, I would find them and push them. If someone was standing on a rug, I could pull that rug out from under them. So I could challenge people in relationships, my friends, those closest to me, of course, and in business, systems, companies, which is, important because that's needed. Sometimes people are complacent with the way things are. So it always seemed like part of my job, for the amount of time that I had that job, was to push those buttons, was to challenge the structure and the climate, the culture that was in place of perhaps complacency. Notice in the introduction, I was described as a former Silent Unity supervisor. Just putting that out there. Anyway, so I was always comfortable with that. Just seemed to be my natural role, to be the agitator, to challenge, to question what is in place. Why is it in place? Just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean it always has to be done that way. And I'm realizing there are times that people aren't ready for that. They can't hear the message I have brought that I so desperately am sure that they need to hear. If I beat them over the head with it, it's just not going to work. There is a space, there is a call for patience, for compassion, for gentleness. But can we balance that? Can we balance that? That's my challenge to you, is to ask yourselves, which role do I fall into most often? And is it appropriate for me, if I'm always the comforter, is it perhaps time for me to be the button pusher and the challenger, to question authority, to question what's in place? I'm doing this because that's the pantomime for pulling the rug out from under stuff. That's why I love improv, by the way, because it's a way to pull the rug out from underneath your own mind. You do, pat your head and rub your tummy, pat your tummy and rub your neighbor's head. It gets the brain going in different directions. It gets you out of old tracks and patterns. So I love doing that to myself and to others. And that's where I think we need to start, on ourselves. It's all about shifting consciousness from complacency, from ignorance, from over-tolerance, to awareness, to mindfulness, to compassion, to love. Yes, for culture. Yes, for society. Yes, for the systems that are in place, and especially for ourselves. So that's my challenge to you, is to start that shift this day, this moment. It's an ongoing shift. It's an ongoing shift, and the only time we can actually take place in it is right now. So we can be that afflictor, yes, and that comforter for one another, and especially for ourselves. I appreciate you. Namaste. Are we ready for the affirmation? Do we stand for this? Do we sit for this?
Well, we usually sit, but we'll do whatever you'd like.
All right, pat your head. Rub your tummy. Now, rub your tummy with your other hand. Pat your neighbor's head. Didn't think I was actually going to do it. Okay, now shake it out. Very good. That sort of thing. You feel more open? Now we're open. Now let these words of wisdom express in our hearts. Together, I am here to inspire as well as soothe my brothers and sisters' souls. I challenge, stretch, break open, and comfort, heal, and support my fellow travelers on their spiritual journey. And because Jackie wouldn't want us to just do it once, right? Again, I am here to inspire as well as soothe my brothers and sisters' souls. I challenge, stretch, break open, and comfort, heal, and support my fellow travelers on their spiritual journey. Amen?